We also have attendees joining us tonight.
Yep.
The interface looks a little different to me than it has in the past. I think you were saying that the chat is disabled now. Do you want to say a few words about how we're working across the panelists versus attendees moving forward?
Sure. If anybody wants to speak, they would just raise their hand.
Okay.
We've reserved those for public comments.
Okay. And we're going to turn to public comments at about 15 minutes before 7. Our meeting closes at 7. So that's usually how we do that. So I do see a hand raised now. If it's wildly urgent, put your hand down, put it up again, and keep doing that until we notice. Otherwise, we will make sure to get to you when we get to that time period. And with that, welcome to everyone. I'd like to take a roll call to make sure that we're all here, and also to acknowledge that our special guest for the evening. So actually, we don't seem to have a very full complement tonight. I do know that a few people couldn't make it. So I'm Laura Horowitz. Frances Pires, also from Ward 1, is not available tonight. She let us know that. Chris Schmee, I see you. Hi. Stuart Berkowitz. Yes, you're there. Nikki Bissell decided she has some new responsibilities and has had to step away from city governance volunteering. So she's has stepped off of our commission. And Yvonne Tisdale, you're still at the beach miraculously through it all. And then we have our ex officio members. So just a point of order. We have enough for quorum, right, David and Andrea? Okay, great. Our ex officio.
Laura, I'm also here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ben. I was working through a list, so sorry. I don't know. I didn't mean to skip that.
No problem. No problem at all.
Okay. Hi, Ben. Our ex officio members, Dr. Sean Doherty.
Right here. And Laura, and I just told the group that I am going to step away for a district meeting, so I apologize for leaving early tonight.
No problem. Joanna Schooler.
Hello.
Hi. Ellen Gale, I just saw you pop on, Ellen.
I was on, but it was not
you were
connecting.
in the wrong
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, I'm here.
Well, I'm glad we found you back in cyberspace. Darlene, sorry, Kenneth Murdoch. I have to update my roster.
Hi, everybody. I might have to leave a little bit early too, but thank you for having me here tonight. As most of you have seen, things have been a little bit of troublesome in St. Louis County. The county council is going to meet tomorrow.
Oh, okay. And Lori Anzalotti.
I'm here.
All right. And then Joanne Bolton and Susan Buse are both here as our aldermanic representatives. So we look like we're all here. And tonight we have joining us Christina Garmendia, who, in addition to doing data consulting as an independent consultant, I believe she also works at the Race and Opportunity Learning Lab at WashU. And I think she's one of the most skillful data-headed people handling, thinking about equity in our whole region. I'm really pleased that she agreed to talk to us tonight about some work she's doing around St. Louis housing report cards for different areas. So after we do some of our core business, Christina will speak to us for probably about a half hour, and then we'll have some Q&A. So our first order of business is approval of the December 10th minutes. These were sent in advance of the meeting. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes? Thanks, Ben. I saw you made a motion. Can I get a second? Chris, that's a second, let's have a vote. If you're ready to approve the minutes, you can just signal with your hand raised. Great. The next thing we wanted to turn our attention to is we had a really meaty December 10th meeting where we had two outside experts speak to us about sort of the history of segregation in St. Louis writ large and how Clayton fits into that. And then the specific history of the Bonham, Carondelet neighborhood in Clayton and the folks who have been displaced in that area. And we didn't really have much time to talk about that afterwards. So we just wanted to open up with some time for the entire membership to share, what struck them, what they're sitting with now, and especially any insights you might have about where this takes our work next. We'll only have a short slice of time in this meeting to begin talking about the year ahead, but we imagine our next couple meetings will really be focused on our priorities for 2021 and the arc of the work moving forward. So any of your thoughts that are moving in that direction, or just what struck you about Donna and Terry's presentation?
I just want to thank Donna Rogers Beard again for her work and her dedication, but that presentation was just so well done and also opened our eyes to the neighborhood in our own neighborhood that was beautifully done and totally wiped out purely on the basis of race. And so I think that was a really great presentation and wanted to thank her again. And I hope that as we're considering commemorative plaques that we find a way, and I did send that suggestion, but find a way to put that history out publicly so that the community really can see it as they walk down the street.
It
Yeah.
also brings into question what, if anything, we can do to make up for our mistakes of the past. That's mildly put.
Yeah, I appreciate Donna's work so much for exactly that reason. It feels like such a big, almost impossible to enter conversation to think about how do we correct a massive legacy of racial segregation. But when you're able to look into the specifics of one community, it becomes much more manageable to say we have some specific work that we can do. So that's also what it made me think about was, it's a treasure that Donna has taken the time to connect with so many families for whom Clayton has been part of their family history. And I would love to imagine those families seeing this body as a place they would attend meetings and be part of the process of thinking about where the community goes with racial equity issues.
It's also easy to see the impact on generational wealth when people are denied property in areas that grow in value, and compensating for that is a whole other issue, I realize, but that's where real equity lies, not just in plaques, but in actually making it right.
Looking at Terry's contribution of the evening, which was kind of more looking forward, and Donna's was great, and think that's this third time, and every time you hear it, you get a little bit more. And so it resonated more and more with me. But I walked away with a real shift in my thinking about policy initiatives that we might want to put in place, given the statistics Terry gave us. And it is hard, one of the things that became so true is losing that indigenous population of people of color, just really made what he said resonate even more, that you need a certain percentage of people of color living in a place to attract other people of color. At least that's what I took away from it. And it retroactively feels like a very lost opportunity, but proactively it makes me think about, what what we could do and what kind of initiatives we might be able to start to make it a more welcoming place for people of color. Because there are certainly many African Americans and people of color that, you know, professionals send their kids to Burroughs, MICDS, New City School. And why don't they move to Clayton for the schools? What is it that, you know, we project as a community that is not welcoming? Because it's a, you know, if you track people that went to New City School, where my kids went, when the shift comes in 6th grade, there was 10 to 12 kids that moved to Clayton for the schools. All of them were white in both girls' class. And all of the kids that my daughters went to that of color went on to private schools. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, but if you can afford to do private school your kid's whole life, if you have 2 kids, you can probably afford to buy a home in Clayton and do it. So it's not an economic thing. I'd always been thinking about it as an economic thing. You know, what can we do to make it more affordable? And while that's another equity piece, what I'm realizing it's really about how do we, you know, it's like, how do we prevent forest fires? How do we change a mindset of Clayton being kind of a stuck up, snobby, not very welcoming place that I was actually, quite honestly, in 2004 when I moved here, a little bit concerned about living in after living in University City for 20 years. So that's what his, you know, presentation really resonated with me, was a real shift in what we might think of as policy and outcomes. Anyways.
One of my goals for 2021 is to make better use of our ex officio members. I noticed a lot of body language of people moving towards their camera as Joanne was speaking. So if that's you, feel free to unmute yourself and share what you're thinking.
I would say it might be an opportunity for education, because I would guess that there are many people who live in Clayton who don't know the history of Clayton. And, you know, by educating people about the history, that could serve as a starting point, and people could help, you know, residents could help figure out where we go from here. Because I would say that a lot of people who live in Clayton might not know the history of Clayton as it pertains to racial issues.
Ellen, do you think there's a role for the businesses in that as well? Educating or being educated?
Yeah, definitely. I would include businesses with the residents for sure. We could certainly put it out to them if there was some sort of educational component. Absolutely.
The only thing I would add is that, you know, the conversations that we're having within our district is about the diversity of our population within our schools. And I've shared that before at this the commission meeting, is that we're looking at strategies for how to increase diversity within our schools, and how challenging that is to have an insular within Clayton. So we have the voluntary transfer program, which increases our population of African American students. But, you know, once, you know, with that system coming to a sunset at some point, it really is a systemic issue in terms of, if we look at diversity within the district, it's really going to diminish in terms of our Black and Brown students. And so it's you know, I think about what would it be like if, you know, thinking about the historical context that Donna brought to it, and like what would our community be? And so, and then I also like what Ben had to say. It's like, how do we make up for those mistakes from the past and move into the future? And so I just think that it also has an impact in terms of creating an environment for our students that really is representative of our world and global, and right now that's an issue that's hard for us to solve, but because there's not the population within our community. So
That's what I'm saying exactly, Sean, is we don't have that population, but there's no reason why we shouldn't have that population. That population exists in the greater St. Louis region. We don't have an area that's welcoming enough. And part of what I heard Terry say is that an area needs to be at least 30% people of color before people of color feel comfortable moving there. Maybe, I'm not a person of color, so I can't speak to that, but I don't know. It just feels like it's just, for me, this was a very educating moment of thinking in my own personal experience that, oh my gosh, there were all these African-American families that my girls were friends with during elementary school whose parents were doctors and lawyers and went professors at WashU and professionals. But they all, none of them came to Clayton. I never thought about that until this whole equity thing came. None of them of color came to Clayton. They all chose to stay in the private schools. So I know we give as good an education, honestly, as the private schools do. So, what is the barrier? Many families, almost a dozen of families felt it either to pay tuition to Clayton or to move into Clayton, yet none of them were persons of color. And that's a lot for a class size at a private elementary school like that, so.
Well, I will jump in and say hi. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kenneth Murdoch. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for St. Louis County. And we are building a 2021 equity plan for the entire county. And that's one reason why I sit in on different equity commissions. One thing I will say that I've heard other commissions talk about, and they're not many, you're one of the few, talk about is a welcoming plan. And what kind of welcoming plan do they have for people who are coming into the area? That helps a little bit. And I think that's something to think about. Everyone can hear me. But I do enjoy this conversation that you're having. I think it's a good start. I think building equity and talking about equity and inclusion. I also trained in bias management and things like that. But I think those are good steps to start working on. And we're going to be asking other municipalities to work on them also on a bigger plan. But you should also know that the county government is working on the same thing at the same time. Could you not hear the last part?
No, we did. That was great.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
I would and listen to what everyone has said and really appreciated the presentations at our December meeting. I think it was good to have both of those presentations because it gave us some more information, enlightenment, I can't say that, but it shed a light on what's happened in the past so that we can learn from it. And then it gives us the opportunity, as Joanne said too, as Alderwoman Bolton talked about in terms of looking forward to the future. I think we need to really take a comprehensive look about how do we go about driving diversity and inclusion. I think because you would like to, I would want us to take a look at what does it mean to be diverse in terms of, not just culturally and racially, but also from a socioeconomic perspective, and really look at how do you really broadly look at diversity and make it a place where we all benefit from having all kinds of people around us. So that was my takeaway.
Laura, Joanna, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of looking to diversify so that many people have a chance to live in our community and not only people who are professionals with a certain level of income. I also think that given the past month and particularly what's happened to Concordia, it's no mystery why families of color don't want to live in Clayton. I think Sean might know about this story, but a couple of families and I worked to find housing for a family who wanted to remain in the Clayton School District. It was a family of color. And despite the fact that we were able to identify affordable housing for them, they had no interest in living here because of the way they would be looked at when frequenting our coffee shops and businesses and walking down the street. And their child was eventually unable to stay in Clayton School District as a result. And so, you know, the story of what happened with Concordia and the boys who were doing what every other kid in the neighborhood was doing and were racially profiled, along with that personal story that I have, where it's like, look, we have an apartment, it fits, your kid can stay in this district and finish out their schooling here. And it was like, absolutely not. Indicate to me that we have a lot of work to do at the granular level. And I guess it starts big with programs and thinking about diversity and inclusion, but it's going to be, I think what Chief Smith has said about personal interactions and it's going to take time to earn trust applies.
Well, thank you all. I think that you all basically covered the full range of topics that David, Andrea, Susan, and the mayor and I had a call this week about what's next for the Equity Commission. And I would say you more succinctly covered the full range of issues than we did. I think all of those things are sort of up in the air. And the big question is how and in what priority order we begin to tackle some of these big questions of what does it really mean to become a more welcoming and inclusive community? What's the policy level changes that can be made there? What has to be done through education and personal outreach? What do we do with this history that we're aware of? How do you rectify it? How do you recognize it? Both those things have come up really strongly. I want to make sure that we have time for our presentation. And Yvonne and the communications subcommittee have started such a lovely tradition of making sure that we ground our work every month in a reflection about the purpose of this work and its larger narrative. So I'm not sure if today's reflection has a slide, but if it does, you're welcome to share it this time and take it away, Yvonne.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Greetings and Happy New Year. As a commission, last year we established, as Laura mentioned, a tradition where from time to time we would have an appropriate reflection to consciously give consideration and appreciation for individuals who greatly contributed to equity and inclusion. These reflections would also help to keep the CEC members motivated and uplifted to take actions to bring about positive change in equity, diversity, and inclusion. Today, we reflect on the work of two doctors of diversity, one a medical doctor and one a PhD. Dr. Herman Geiger, a physician who believed that doctors should use their expertise and moral authority to improve conditions like poverty, hunger, discrimination, joblessness, and the lack of education. And Dr. Geiger did just that. And the next person needs no introduction, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a preacher, the most influential African-American civil rights leader ever, and a Nobel Prize recipient of peace. Dr. King had many accomplishments and made significant changes. Sadly, Dr. King in April 1964 was assassinated when I was only 11 years old in my hometown, Memphis, Tennessee, something I will never forget. On Monday, the nation celebrates the 26th anniversary honoring Dr. King's civil rights legacy. With everything going on in our nation, and especially with COVID, there's no better time than now to make our lives and others better and heal our communities. As you know, COVID have put many people from racial and ethnic minority groups at increased risk of getting sick and dying. In the presentation, we have provided examples of activities and events and ways that you can get involved. It is only appropriate and timely for us to reflect on these two doctors. I also want to leave a quote, two quotes from Dr. King. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And Dr. King said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. So for the next large chunk of our time, we're going to hear from Christina Garmendia about the St. Louis Housing Report Card Project and what they've found so far about Clayton. I also asked, I tried to capture some of our conversations so far with is there an ongoing conversation for the Equity Commission around housing and what might that look like? So I am happy to give the floor to Christina and we'll have time to answer some questions afterwards. And thank you for being with us. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Laura. And thank you all for having me. And it was actually great to listen in and hear how you guys processed previous presentations. That's helpful for me. So I'm going to share my screen and I have a PowerPoint. I'll try and keep to the 30-minute goal. So there's time for questions as well. So do that. Okay. All right, and just by way of introduction, yeah, Christina Garmendia. I have my own research consulting firm called UrbanRx. I moved back to St. Louis in 2017 to do the Equity Indicators Project for the city of St. Louis. So, and one of the areas that I didn't get to do as much work on was housing for that project. And so it's been a real pleasure to be involved in the Affordable Housing Report Card. This is an initiative of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Coalition with support from the Community Builders Network. So that's who is sponsoring this project. And when they asked me to be to lead the effort, I was very excited to do that. And just so other people know, the other hat I wear is not at WashU anymore, but I do serve as our PPE.
I'm sorry.
PPE. That's all right. PPE coordination campaign for the regional response team. So I do COVID-19 response work, and in addition to working on this project. So, but the things I thought I would cover would be just to introduce myself and the project, kind of review where we are. This is a real live active research project. It is not completed. Go over some of the key terms, key players, and as Laura suggested, put Clayton in the context of the region. So this was a lot of fun for me. I just pulled data that I was already looking at for the report card. But the purpose of this report card is really to evaluate the current need for affordable housing in both the city and the county combined. So looking at the region and taking into account many dimensions of affordable housing in the region. And it ultimately will be a tool, an accountability tool for community organizations, housing advocates, regional decision makers, and residents who really want to see more of and more equitable use of affordable housing resources. And that's a really large bucket of what we're considering resources. Just to give you kind of an example of how nationally we look at affordable housing need, this is kind of the goal that we're looking to be able to achieve, is some kind of quantitative estimate of how many units do we have in the region to meet various income levels. So one of the things Laura mentioned in her email was this concern about affordability for whom. And this is a shared concern among affordable housing advocates in the region. it was important to be able to just aggregate data by income levels. So that's it. That's one of the goals of the project, is be able to provide that level of data with that in mind. So this is national tabulations, and our goal is to be able to provide a similar level of insight at the local, regional level. And just like I said, the report card is in progress. So we have a 4-phase plan, and we have executed phase 1 and 2. We're now in the middle of phase 3. So just to give you a sense, in phase 1, we're really establishing what do we want to hold people accountable for around affordable housing. So what are the needs, and what are some examples of report cards from around the country? We were really based our work around the New Orleans report card as our shining example of a community that's made a coalition of affordable housing providers and advocates and created this shared accountability framework. And so these little arrows show like the deliverables. So we defined our project goals and we drafted our project plan in phase 2. Oh, and by the way, this work really started in the fall, and we're hoping to wrap up by late spring. Now, not putting firm dates on any of that, because COVID-19 has just made things estimating things really hard, but that's we're right in the middle right now. In phase 2, we did a scan of existing metrics, and we're really trying to work in coordination and in alignment with affordable housing strategic planning that's going on in the region. So we're in communication with both our city partners. So RISE Community is leading the affordable housing strategic planning for the city. And then also we're in touch with the county representatives. So Shannon Koenig and Molly Metzger on the county side to, try and coordinate and be on the same page about different initiatives. And we're in phase 3. And so we're collecting data, we're finalizing metrics, we're having focus groups with our members of our coalition. And that's how we're going to be kind of refining what's going to be in the report card, what's possible. And so we're kind of right in the middle of that process. And in phase 4, we're writing it all up, and it'll be presented in both the form of a report, a PDF, and as well as a website, so we can keep information updated over time. So the goal is to have a kind of baseline report card that's maintained by the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Coalition and CBN into perpetuity. So that's the vision and the plan. And these are the kinds of affordable housing strategies that we're looking at. So I'm going to just read them out for the record. But as you can see, there's lots of different ways to support affordable housing, whether it's preserving existing affordable housing, increasing new supply, preventing displacement, and supporting housing stability, enforcing fair housing policies, increasing accessibility for residents with special needs, improving the quality of affordable housing, and promoting mobility to areas of opportunity, increasing access to affordable housing financing, and lastly, improving quality of life in affordable neighborhoods. So really, this is a comprehensive list. This is kind of we're doing our research on all these areas. Not all of these may end up being in the report card, because we might not find the right metrics or really agree as a coalition that these are the things we want to be focusing on. So, but this is kind of the world that we're looking at, and they're color coded. So what the color coding means is the precedent frameworks we looked at, the report cards from other regions used most of these. Some of these we heard in our initial interviews with coalition members as something that was really critically important to their, what was important about affordable housing and accountability. And then the yellow is strategies that are present in either city or county strategies. And so just to give a sense, for each of these strategies, we'll be identifying actions. So recommendations, in other words, and metrics. So for example, this increasing new supply of affordable housing, a sample action that other regions have put into place is just recommending agencies set housing production goals. So some of these recommendations are pretty basic. And then, so that's a sample action, and then a sample metric, or a measure of this strategy is actually the number of new affordable housing units, or in our case, the percentage of annual demand that's met. So one of the big goals for this project is to set a number for how much affordable housing need do we have as a region. So that's what that percentage of annual demand met means. And just to give another quick example, another strategy that the county has adopted is promoting mobility to areas of opportunity. And that's using the voucher program. And so one of the sample actions is something I think your group has talked about or is on the table. It's supporting the adoption of source of income protections throughout the county. And a way we would measure that is how many voucher holders are being, how many vouchers are being used in your zip code.
Clayton has passed a source of income bill before the formation of the commission, but it's not all that actionable because the voucher rates for the mobility program and the market rates of rent are not very close together presently in this area.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I didn't know that. But yeah, again, housing. So looking at some key terms about housing affordability, this project is going to be using a complicated definition because it'll be disaggregated by income level. And so we're going to be setting some, so there'll be, we'll be looking at affordability by income level. And this is kind of the definition we'll be using, the HUD area median family income, which covers our entire region. This county and the city is the same, which the income limits, as you mentioned, Laura, that's where that comes into play. And one of the other terms we want to define is measure. And I'm going to talk about metrics and measure. And by measure, I mean, it's how we should assess the quality, value, or effect of something. So how should we be defining success for affordable housing or for this particular strategy? So that is where we are in the process of defining really for the coalition is how should we be measuring success for each of these? And we need to really name that and spell out kind of what are our goals for measuring it. And so just to bring an example in, one of the strategies we're looking at is preserving existing affordable housing. So how would you measure that? And really, since preservation is the act of maintaining, protecting, or keeping something in existence, we're really looking at how's affordable housing lost. And those are all the different ways that affordable housing is lost. Demolition, condemnation, mergers and conversions, rents being raised, properties being sold at a market rate. And so there is measure, which is how something should be measured or how it should be assessed. And then there's metric, which is how we can actually measure the quality, value, or effect of something. And that is a function of data and what data is available. So I just wanted we're going to be describing both of those in this report card. And the existing data that's available for each of these strategies is different, but just to give you an example, here's one of those strategies and where the data is going to be coming from. So HUD has a lot of this data, and this is the data I pulled for us today just to look at for Clayton. The report card will, again, be covering up to 9 different strategies. Not all of them will have data or meaningful metrics associated with them. So this is, we're looking at LIHTC, we're looking at subsidized housing building permits is something that's collected at the federal level. We're looking at another federal data source, American Community Survey, and these are the things that are available through that. We're looking at data that's available locally, so City of St. Louis and St. Louis County. Probably won't be getting to the level of individual municipalities in the county, just because that's a lot of people to ask for ask data from. And I am one.
Surprised there's no publicly available data sets
Right.
in those counties.
For this particular strategy. They definitely have data that we'll be using in other strategies, but not this one. Not definitely any of the equivalents for the city. So like demolition permits or property sales. It doesn't mean that data doesn't exist. I just can't like download it on my own time. I might have to put in a FOIA request. And so some of the metrics that we're looking at for that first strategy, preserving affordable housing units, is change. We're looking at change over time. Change in the number of LIHTC units losing their designation, change in the number of housing vouchers issued, change in the number of public housing units, and then also more in depth looking at the number of units charging rent at various thresholds, how that's changing over time in the region. So you get the idea. But something we want to name, like I did for the equity indicators for the city, for each of these strategies or goals, we want to acknowledge what is important but missing in terms of what's hard to measure. And so it's hard for us to measure loss in affordable housing units because landlords have raised their rent. We don't have rental registration in this region. We don't have rent control. And it's hard for us to measure when landlords are not accepting or discouraging housing voucher use. It's hard for us to capture. There's very low reporting rates. And then it's also hard to measure affordable housing loss in places that didn't have it to begin with. So we're looking at you, Clayton. And just to talk about some key players, affordable housing is a tough issue because it's a fragmented policy problem. It's become fragmented. It didn't used to be so fragmented, but there's many fiefdoms. There are many programs. That's one of the complaints about affordable housing finance is that there's a bajillion programs. They don't have the same timeline. They don't have the same application. And there's also many providers of affordable housing. So affordable housing developers, public housing agencies. And so what that means is that it results in a lack of accountability. And that's a feature, not a bug. So since you guys already had a lecture on segregation, you can really see that in the county where the more fiefdoms we have, the more boundaries we have, it was a strategy to reduce responsibility for being responsible for different groups of people. So, and so an accountability project on affordable housing, and affordable housing is a fragmented issue on its own, coupled with the fragmented nature of our region means that building an accountability tool for this topic in this region is going to be hard. And what I mean by accountability, it's both quantitative, so metrics, just keeping track of numbers, but it's also qualitative. So it's follow through on the promised commitments. So city and the county are going to be making a lot of commitments around affordable housing. Accountability is actually following up on those commitments. And they're both useful and valid. And so a question just to have to pose to this group is what would help to hold you accountable, the city of Clayton, on affordable housing? So we'll just keep that question in mind as I run through this next section, which is a bunch of numbers. And so Clayton in the context of the region as of 2019, just to give a snapshot of your housing situation. This is all 2019 data. You have about 6,200 housing units in all of the city, 91% housing occupancy. You have 41% renters, 59% homeowners, 41% of renters are rent burdened. So they're paying more than a third of their income for rent. And that's about 875 households. The median home value off the charts, $633,000. Median rent, also pretty high, $1,249 per month. And that's from American Community Survey data, 5-year estimates. So it's probably higher, if you were to take a true snapshot in time right now. And in the last 5 years, you guys have built housing, 669 new housing units. And surprise, 93% of new build units were in multifamily buildings. That was a surprise for me. I was not expecting that for Clayton. And so I'm going to just put you in context for the region for each of these. So total number of housing units, you have 1% of the region's supply. So there's almost 620,000 units in the St. Louis region. So just to put in, that's my kind of baseline. If I'm comparing Clayton to the region, that's my baseline. Nice round number of 1%.
Housing stock writ large, not rental units or.
Right, total housing units. So, and affordable housing is not just rental, it's both homeowners and rentals. So we're going to be looking at both for the report card. And so just to frame kind of some of the questions this group might be having is, what is Clayton's responsibility? And how will the report card kind of work? We're not just interested in having stakeholders take accountable or take responsibility for their share of affordable housing, but also growing the size of the pie overall. So this is kind of a question we're struggling with as a coalition is, what does the accountability look like? Are we asking for places like Clayton to be responsible for 1% of the affordable housing need, or some other, how are we going to do that exactly? And just to break down, like Laura said, that was all the housing units. If we look at owner occupied housing units, this is your breakdown of the spread. And I would really say, it's fair to say Clayton doesn't really offer affordable options for those looking to purchase a home. That median home value is way above the median in the city and in the county. And one thing I would note is that there's an equal number of housing units that are valued above $1 million as there are below 300,000. So that's who you guys are right now. And so renter households, you guys have about an equal share, an equivalent share of renters as you might expect for the region. So you have just around 2,300 renter households in the region, and there's around 208,000 total in the region. And so of those renter occupied households, this is the spread of the gross rents that they report paying. And so I would say Clayton offers very limited affordable options for those looking to rent a home or an apartment. And the median rent in Clayton is, again, above the city and the county. Not as ridiculous as owner occupied units, but still significant. And so this is the spread. And there's just a very tiny sliver of rents that are below $500. So this is just a quick analysis. These aren't going to be the final ranges of rents that we're going to be looking at for the report card, but just to give you a sense, Clayton, and this might be a margin of error, this might be a rounding error. That's how few Clayton has, around 28 units. And in St. Louis overall, we have closer to 16,000 units where rents are below $500. So if we were to say, Clayton, if we expect Clayton to have 1% of this, then you're 128 units shy, just to give you, put that in perspective. For rents in between $500 and $1,000, Clayton has more, 651 units, still not reaching that 1% mark. For the next level up, 1,000 to 1,500, you have 951 units. So your share of the regions, you're starting to go above what you might expect. You have 1.5% of the region's units in that rent range. For 1,500 to 2,000, just over 2%. And for rents over $2,000, you got a whopping 5% of the region's total number of units where the rent is above $2,000. If we look at subsidized housing is both housing vouchers and public housing. Clayton has almost none. And there's around 17,000 of subsidized housing units in the region right now. And so just to see the HUD reports that you guys had one housing choice voucher user and 20 project-based Section 8s. So pretty minuscule. And so just to give you a sense of what people see, if they have a voucher and they're looking for somewhere to live, they might go to the HUD database where they're looking at, HUD creates like maps of where there's historical usage of vouchers. And you can see Clayton has big old nothing. So this is what people see if they have a voucher and they're trying to find available housing, which if you know anything about the voucher system, it's actually one of the, like, one, it's a challenge to get the voucher in the first place. And then two, it's hard to find someone to accept that voucher. Or it's harder. It's one of the challenges. And it wasn't always this way in Clayton. There used to be more subsidized housing, and it was primarily Section 8. There was, I don't know the history of this, but this is the numbers I pulled, and it said 2012, 2013, you guys had more like 140, and it dropped to this below 50 since then. And LIHTC units, so low income housing tax credit units. So units that are built by a developer.
Slide for just a second, the previous slide. I want to take a screenshot of that one.
This one, okay.
I'm sure you're probably going to share some of these slides, but
yeah, I'm happy to share this slide deck with you guys. So this is just a quick pull of data. The story behind it is something you guys would know a lot more about. LIHTC units, you guys don't have any. In the region, there's 16,500. These are, so you don't have any. And housing building permits. Clayton is producing a fair share of new build units throughout the region. This is not affordable housing. It's just you're building housing units. And so you built 669 of them in the last 5 years. The St. Louis region added just over 11,000 in that 5-year time frame. So that's about 6% of the region's share. And when I looked at the breakdown between single family and multifamily, I was surprised to see Clayton has built almost very little single family. It's 51 units, which is, I guess, not a surprise when you look at how small Clayton is and how very few probably parcels there are for building single family housing. And so that represents about 1% of the region's share. And when you look at multifamily, so in Clayton, you built 618 units in the last 5 years, and there were 5,700 plus built in the whole region in that time frame. So you guys are representing about 11% of the region's new multifamily building. So just to summarize all of that, Clayton is underrepresented in units where rents are less than 500, between 500 and 1,000, subsidized housing and LIHTC units. You're overrepresented in high rents and multifamily building permits. And so what can that data tell you? Clayton is a small player in the overall housing market of the region. Its affordable housing strategy will likely need to focus on renters and not homeowners. And it doesn't currently provide affordable or subsidized housing for working families. Developers are interested in building in Clayton. And Clayton punches above its weight in supplying the region with new multifamily housing. So that's a data dump, but the big picture is the affordable housing report card will tell us how much affordable housing we need as a region. It won't tell you. Data will not tell you how much affordable housing each municipality should take responsibility for creating. And in a fragmented region like ours, only leadership can claim responsibility for achieving more affordable housing. The way our region is structured, we have people claiming like, well, I don't need to do that. Nobody needs affordable housing in my municipality. It's because they don't live there now. And that's by design. So really to fix an area like affordable housing in a fragmented region like St. Louis, we have to have people step up and take responsibility. And so just to give you like a range, I don't know yet if we're going to be recommending different municipalities to take responsibility for X or YZ share of the need. But if we did, this is kind of where Clayton might land. You know, I think it would be reasonable to say Clayton could take on meeting 1% of the affordable housing needs. So the affordable housing that we don't have yet as a region. But if you look at the multifamily numbers, then it's not crazy to say that you could take on 10%. But that's just, you know, that's the, you know, what we might be looking at in terms of the report card, like giving suggestions for how different parts of the region can take responsibility for this important issue. And just so to frame out, if you're worried about like, well, Clayton doesn't have space to build, you know, there's no way we could take on 10% or even 1% of affordable housing need. Creating affordable housing is not just about building new affordable housing, it's also about making your housing more accessible. And so in a desirable market, close to jobs and retail like Clayton, you could also be looking at decreasing the number of rent burden households. And how might you do that? That's increasing access and use of housing vouchers. And something Clayton could do is increasing the number of landlords that are actively accepting housing vouchers, and having that map that I showed from HUD actually be populated. So those are some of the things just to broaden the scope of what we're talking about in terms of affordable housing. And I do want to recognize that somewhere like Clayton and different municipalities, there's going to be limitations to what you can do, for sure, just like geographic. And there's also going to be opportunities. So looking at that kind of and being more creative about how to meet affordable housing need is something that we all need to be doing. And so that's my quick summary of where we are in the project, kind of giving a preview of where it might go and giving you a lot of data to chew on. But if you have questions or feedback, happy to take them here and happy to take them at my email address.
Hey, Christina, this is Yvonne. Question, you mentioned that you benchmarked with New Orleans. How long have they been on that plan and how well are they doing now?
Yeah, so they have been doing this for about 10 years. And they're great. Like they've been giving themselves like letter grades, and that's changed over time. I think their first one, they gave themselves a B. This last one, they gave themselves an F. And they were just comparing to what they had committed to doing as a coalition and what actually ended up happening. And so each of the things that they're measuring, both the actions like recommendations, like did they pass a XYZ ordinance or did they produce enough units? That's how they kind of gave themselves a grade based on those. So it varies, and that's what I remember from looking at the New Orleans example.
Christina,
Thank
can you go back to that slide on what we can do in the way of meeting? Yes, that one right there.
That one? Okay.
Yes. You say increase the number of landlords that accept housing vouchers. What actions or what areas could that become possible?
So I'm going to put on my other hat real quick, an old hat. One of the things I used to do was a real estate technology. I still own it, but a real estate technology company. And one of the things we did was advertise properties for sale that were vacant, like owned by land banks and that kind of thing. So one of the things, it's not like you're making up a new opportunity, it's advertising it, the existing opportunities better. So if we're looking at one thing this group could do is look at how do people discover affordable housing, and Reverend Lori Anziliati, how do you say your last name?
Anzalotti.
Anzalotti, you gave that story, that example, and I think doing a little more work on like how do people actually find possible places to live, and how can Clayton appear in that universe more often. That's going to be one of those things you can do to become more visible, and without changing, like you're not going to be building new units, affordable units, or building public housing, for example, but you can increase the visibility of the landlords that will accept housing vouchers, and presenting that welcome mat. So that's just some things I would think about. Like I said, we're not in the middle of this report card process, so it's not a formal list of recommendations yet.
Do some cities require housing developers to accept affordable housing vouchers, et cetera?
Well, that's that source of income ordinance that many places have passed. It is to protect, it is to prevent discrimination against housing voucher users.
And Clayton did pass that ordinance, so you can't, but the issue is that with the rent prices, even with vouchers, there's just no place they'll let you have it, number one. And then the other thing is, don't be too gleeful about the multifamily housing that's built here, because those are some of the most expensive places in Clayton, because they tend to be, right now there's some new townhomes going up on Gay Avenue that are $1.5 million to start.
Yeah, and I'm not gleeful about it, but it's an opportunity because you have developers who are building multifamily where a unit, like none of those units are being set aside for people of lower income, and they could be. Like the math that a developer does, it would support having a unit, if it's a large enough building, having a few units where they're affordable to someone of a certain income level.
It could be, but wouldn't that require Clayton's enforcement or ordinance procedures or requirements?
Yes, and it's a little harder to make those demands of developers if Clayton isn't, St. Louis the city is rampant at giving out tax incentives. Clayton, I don't know if they need to do that, but it is something like the Clayton government would have to regulate, right?
We have given out a lot of tax incentives for apartments.
Can I speak here, Chris, to this? We actually do not give tax. We have done it in the past and have had a lot of pushback from residents about tax incentives for residential. Because it really impacts our school district, and we try to be as respectful of our property taxes to our school district and other municipalities. We do have, though, if someone wants to build something a much denser, we have a process that most of the large apartment buildings, I think all of them that have been built, go through, and it's called planned unit development. And in a planned unit development, the developer has to give back some benefits. And one of the benefits that is on there and has been for a long time is some type of affordable housing. And up in the 9 years I've been on the board, none of the developments have used that to get the points that they need for their planned unit development.
Christina, could you switch, in light of Joanne's comment, could you go to the next slide? No, the 10% one.
This one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It dawns on me that we were 10% of the multifamily building within the county, almost 11%. Between 2015 and 2019, we were almost 11%, according to your earlier slides, of the multifamily building. So we certainly could meet the metric of taking on 10% of affordable housing. If we can, as you put it, punch above our weight in one category, why can't we punch above our weight in another? And Joanne, like the piece that you point out about earning certain points for developers, I would assume that there's a way that we could incentivize that for developers.
Yes, you could change the point system.
Sure, we
To
could change the point system, but there's lots of different benefits that
yeah.
are advantageous to a city. So, you know, that would require, we did just recently change them actually, and we upped them, for instance, the Shanley building being retained. Keeping some of the older, we're losing so much of our older population of architecture that's so distinctive in the downtown area. And because we do have a lot of buildings, as you've said, Christina, but it's all very much in what we call our Ward 3, our downtown area of Clayton. It's not distributed widely over the rest of the city. So we're really talking about a postage stamp area. And it was done with our policy initiatives. When I got onto this board, what we were looking to do 9 years ago was get, you know, feet on streets and to get pedestrians to drive more people living in the downtown area, because it looked very dead at night. You could basically roller skate down the middle of any of our major downtown streets. So there, what you are seeing was a very, you know, we did sell some property that the city themselves had. And we did some things to help incentivize getting apartments, but not, except for the very first one, we did not use tax incentives. We got beat up bad. So.
But going back once again with respect to the gradual decline of the voluntary district program and those benefits, why could not Clayton require, with respect to housing developments, that certain units be set aside on an affordable housing basis and still satisfy the school district, as you mentioned, and others?
Are you asking me that, Ben?
I'm just asking in general, not particularly you, but just in general.
I mean, I don't know that there's any reason we couldn't. I mean, but there are a lot of people that, I mean, there's two sides to every issue. You're then putting an impediment on someone's private property and telling them, I mean, they're going to lose money from it. So, I mean, it could be done. It is done in many places. There's just two arguments.
It's done in many, many places. And as we see these slides from Christiana, we're way, way behind.
Let's put a pin in that for just a moment, because we only have Christina with us tonight. So I want to make sure if there are other questions about her presentation, we get to them.
Sure. Thank you.
And there's always my question about, let me go back to that slide. What would help you guys?
Be accountable?
Yep. So what would help to hold you accountable?
Yeah, I actually have a question, I think, that relates to that, which is, you know, it's really helpful when you put things in percentage terms, because then there is a chance to think about like, oh, yeah, I guess if we're 1% of the units, that's a benchmark, at least to orient yourself to. So my question is, I'm aware of in New Jersey, there's been some model policy about fair share housing. And a lot of good things have flown from that. My understanding is that's a policy that's on a percentage basis, but I don't understand exactly how it works. And so while you were talking, I was wondering, is it appropriate to think of like a proportionate percentage, or maybe like a span of percentages? Like, you know, I don't know that Clayton will ever have a lot of rent available apartments that are less than $500, but maybe we might say, hey, you know, 0.1% is way lower than our proportion. We think it needs to be closer to, you know, 0.7. And then we say like, well, that's within spitting distance or something, you know, like some sort of span versus like, this is our percentage, this is where we're aiming across all these other different metrics. How have you seen that handled in different places? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I would not. So before I was here in St. Louis, I was at Rutgers Law. I was helping set up a think tank on metropolitan equity. And so I was originally going to be looking at fair share legislation and how it's going in New Jersey, and it's not going well. So it's like you said, it's hard to make sense of it. And the suburbs of New Jersey are predominantly white, high, wealthy compared to the cities of New Jersey, which are poor, Black. And so there's a dynamic that is relatable to the St. Louis region as well. And, one of the challenges there is that a lot of suburbs of New Jersey have no affordable housing. And that's, whether it's because they only allow single family housing to be built on a certain acre size. There's ways that it's been regulated into being exclusive. So they have some challenges there. And not every community wants that to change. So their adoption of and acceptance of the fair share housing legislation is not uniform. So, and that's why I say more about like taking responsibility and stepping up versus it's hard to make people do what they don't want to do. So, so that's just a snapshot. Like that's very challenging and to regulate and make municipalities do. But what was the second part of your question? I've lost track.
I guess I just was wondering if it would make as much sense to say we should be at 1% across a number of indicators as to say we want our range to be tighter, but we believe that our community should still have a range, like you can't turn a multi-million-dollar home into something else. That's what it is,
I do think we're going to be looking at different income levels for the report card. So units of affordable to people making 30% of area median income, 50, 60, 80. And so a place like Clayton might find it more palatable and easier to achieve meeting that higher income threshold, like the 80%, or even, if we're being honest, like just like 100% of area median income. That might be we're not going to have units that are affordable to every level in every municipality. It's not going to be equally distributed. It's not equally distributed now. So, but it is just giving you a sense of like where Clayton stands in the region at this point. And that might explain some of the, why it's hard to get people to move to Clayton that are of different backgrounds. Yeah. So not a clear answer. I'm sorry, but
no,
it is.
This was wonderful. We really appreciate it. I think what you found about multi-family units really maps onto some previous data that has shown in terms of zoning, we're one of few places in the Mid-County corridor that has that where you can even build multi-family units. So this was really interesting. We need to move on if we're going to get to our subcommittee reports. So I'd like to ask, if you haven't had a chance to ask a question and would like to, if you could write it down and get it to me, and I will pass them along to Christina and make sure we kind of loop back before the next session. Andrea, can you speak to, you wanted to speak to the annual report, and maybe you can roll right into our old business of public comments at the same time? Or David,
I can talk for a minute. I'll talk for a minute about the annual report, and then I'll turn it over to Andrea, because we didn't have any public comments at the last meeting during the public comment portion of the meeting. So anyhow, on the annual report, this is something that we've talked about. I think it would be really nice for the commission to do this. We're coming up on 1 year of activity with the commission. That's in March. Our first meeting was in March of 2020. I think would be great to show the community the work that the commission's been undertaking here, and summarize that information, display that prominently on the website and on the Equity Commission's page. And then also it's an opportunity for the commission to present that information to the Board of Aldermen kind of in a condensed version. Because what the city will be doing around the same time is giving the community an update on 21st century policing and what the city's done to accomplish everything that was set out in that plan. So from a timing standpoint, I think it makes a lot of sense to provide those documents kind of on the same track. And I'm bringing it up now because it's going to take a little bit of time to put it together. The city has some annual reports that we put together on city activities. We have some annual budget reports we put together. They're graphic intensive. It's not just a written document. It's typically eye-catching, really easy to find the information and find out what's going on. But I just wanted to put that out there, that something like that from the Equity Commission, I think would really be great. So it's something that the Communications Subcommittee potentially could work on. And then on the law enforcement side, of course, there's things that have been accomplished on that end as well. And if the law enforcement subcommittee could send some kind of summary to the communications subcommittee, the communications subcommittee could start working on that annual report with the help of staff. That would be great if we could roll that out right around, again, the 1-year anniversary, or maybe a month behind that, of the commission starting its work. So any feedback on that, I'm happy to receive that and talk through it. Go ahead.
Who should get who on the communication committee wants to be the receiver of the law enforcement subcommittee's stuff? Which one of you folks?
Joanne,
it's not a big deal. Just get it.
So I'm going to ask that we figure out some of these things over email. Yvonne, I know you've done some pretty cool work sketching out what we have accomplished so far, because you shared that with me. So just to put be in your ear about that. We also need a new volunteer to sit on the commemorative landscape task force now that Nikki has stepped off of the commission. So is that something we can follow up via email as well?
We could. Typically we would like the commission to approve or select that member. So that's more appropriate to be done within an open meeting like this. If anybody's would like to do it, or somebody wants to nominate somebody else, we could probably get through that pretty quickly here.
I'll volunteer.
That'd be wonderful. I'll nominate Chris.
I'll second.
Great. Let's have a vote. All in favor of Chris being our representative to the commemorative landscape task force? Woo! Okay, great.
Great. Thank you all.
Do we have a new commission member to appoint? Or is the Board of Aldermen going to appoint a new?
Hold that responsibility presently, so we'll have to wait and see what we hear back from, about who's joining us. So I feel like we need to move to public comment, because we made a promise to 12 people. Is it 12 and more people that have coming on this other side of the Zoom room? So I'd like to do that. My intention would be to still have like a couple minutes to do subcommittee updates. That may not be entirely possible within the 7 o'clock time boundary. My suggestion is, if we hit 7 o'clock and we haven't gotten there, I'm willing to stay on longer. And I would like to invite our commission members to do the same, but I'd like to release the public who's been hanging with us quietly watching at the time boundary that we said we would keep to. It seems like I'm getting some nods that that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and move in that direction. Kathleen Gund, I see that your hand is up. And your mic should be enabled now.
Hello, Laura. Thank you for recognizing me. Christina, fabulous report, and I have looked for a lot of that information, and have been unable to find it. So that was really great to see it like on the screen. And I just wanted to say that Clayton didn't get to this place of unaffordability or high rent and high medium home prices. Like the way Clayton got there, it was kind of systematic. It's something that was driven by housing policies, developers who came in. And I will also say we did give tax credits away for the first residential or a recent residential high rise, the one that was by the Metrolink station. And if I'm wrong on that, someone can kind of tell me that I'm wrong.
No, we did. That's the one we got beat up on, Kathleen.
Yeah, but it went through. So we have given tax credits away for residential high rise.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was just saying that we've done about 4 or 5 since then, and we have no appetite to ever do that again.
Right. But I'm just saying that was, if you look back on that, that was a missed opportunity, that if we were giving those credits away, to not ask for something like have affordable housing units put in. That's not here nor there. But I will say that a few years ago, I was in a meeting with our former city manager, and the question came up about a lot of the new residential units, rental units, apartment units that were being put in around the city. And someone said, are the landlords over in the Moorlands and Demond upset about this because they might lose renters? And the former city manager said, no, the landlords are super excited because these high rents that these new units will be able to charge is driving up the rents in Demond and Moorlands. So this didn't happen accidentally. This happened through a lot of decisions, a lot of which were made at the city level. And I think that we have a responsibility and also an opportunity that we can make different decisions in the future to increase affordable housing, or if you want to call it housing available for working class families. And one thing that hasn't been brought up is we could, as a city, actually go back to some of these developers and actually ask them if they want to contribute or be a solution to this problem. Yes, they might lose some money, but we can do that. But I wasn't actually planning on saying that. One of the things that I actually wanted to ask the commission is when will we be able to see the results of the equity audit that was performed at the city level? And I understand the report was done at the end of October. Has that been presented to the board, and will that be available to the public?
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Yes, that will be made available to the public. Right now, we're still doing the internal work as far as HR is concerned, purchasing those types of things, really assigning data to that equity audit information that we received, which is really just kind of a general picture of the city, but didn't get into really anything measurable or quantitative. So all that has to be done on the staff side. That is something that we're working on, but isn't quite ready to roll out to the public just yet. So we hope to have that within the next month or two to bring to the commission, not just the data itself, but goals attached to it, things we'd like to improve and really have some solutions kind of ready to go. So that is work we're undertaking. We did talk to the consultants that had produced that document just a couple of weeks ago. You know, they have other, I don't want to call it products, but other studies and things they can conduct. I don't know that we're going to move forward with any of those because, again, what we'd like to have is something quantitative and measurable that we can put in place to try to get some results. Anyhow, that is information that is forthcoming. There's just a lot of data work on the back end that we're still working through, along with a lot of other things that have been going on. So anyhow, it's underway.
We have one final public comment and just a minute left for that comment. Eleanor, your mic should be permitted now.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I grew up in St. Louis, or sorry, I grew up in Clayton. And I don't live in Clayton anymore. And I think like a decent part of that reason is because it's very difficult to find housing. I'm 25. It's very difficult to find housing that a young professional can afford, even if you're working a full-time job in a professional field. And part of the other reason I didn't move back to Clayton is because I want to live in a diverse community, and Clayton is not a diverse community. So I live in U City now, and I really enjoy living in a mixed income neighborhood that's also mixed race. So I really, really, really strongly suggest that Clayton move forward with providing more affordable housing. My second thing is that I have been reading some news saying that cities around the country have been finding out that their employees were among the white supremacists who attacked the Capitol last Wednesday. And so I'm not accusing Clayton employees of being part of that group, but I want to be sure that no Clayton employees were part of that group. So I'm requesting that the city of Clayton just check through like whatever employment records they have to see like were any Clayton police, other Clayton public employees part of that group that participated in the insurrection on the Capitol. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We are at our time boundary. If you came to join us tonight, we really thank you for being here. It sounds like people agreed to extend our time by 5 minutes. I do see one more comment. David, can you advise if I should continue public comment or switch?
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay. Rick, your mic should be enabled now.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. One of the big takeaways from Terry Jones' presentation at the December meeting, this was confirmed, I think, by Joanne's comments earlier tonight, is there are sufficient numbers of people of color in the metropolitan area who can afford to live in Clayton. And there's a need to understand why they choose not to. The normal reasons include personal preference and search patterns. And I think if we want to study this, it would be helpful, perhaps critical, to have a committee made up of residents who are persons of color to have the conversations and get out in front, encouraging others to move here. But right now, if you look at the committee, it is basically almost all white people. And I don't know that the committee is going to get the kind of results that we're looking for in terms of attracting a diverse population.
That's very well said. Thanks. Okay, can we do a lightning round law enforcement subcommittee update?
Okay, thank you, Laura, and welcome to everybody. I had a more fulsome kind of report. I can't follow Christina with a data-driven report, and I can't do this in 60 minutes. So what I suggest, let me just say that we've been working really hard as a subcommittee with Ben, with Francis, Joanne, even Susan, Lori also. We've been doing a lot of work. We have a lot of information. And hopefully by the next meeting in February, we can have a more fulsome discussion of the municipal court, which is going to require some time and some analysis to digest really what we've been doing and what we've come up with. Most of it is really good news. We're going to have some suggestions, but it's been really hard work. It's not easy. So rather than dive into it at this point, Laura, I'd rather just pass it along unless Ben has something to say. And let's leave it to hopefully we can give a more fulsome report in February.
Okay, great. Thanks for your flexibility. For the communications subcommittee, who can speak on behalf of that group?
I don't know if Ben jumped off. if you did, I'll do a lightning round on that. We got the results of the survey about changing the mission statement, and are happy to report that out of 60 responses, 52 were in favor, only 4 disagreed, the rest were neutral. 4 were neutral. There were 30 comments we received. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of this change. I'd say about half of them were purely yes, and our yes and was saying, that's great, but what are you going to do? Or could we add issues like sustainability? About 1/4 of those comments were summed up with, you might say, yes, and now what are you going to do about it? So people were not only saying yes and add this, but saying now do something. There were only 3 or 4 naysayers who either felt that adding DEI was merely window dressing or unnecessary, and then 3 or 4 people who had wordsmithing ideas, who felt like we didn't need to have the word balanced in there. We could substitute accountable for equitable, blah, blah, blah. So bottom line, the response to the survey was overwhelmingly in favor of making those suggested changes.
Cool. So that sounds like something that Joanne and Susan can carry forward to the Board of Aldermen. And I'm sorry that my time management fell a little short tonight. I'm actually, for those of you who know me outside this role, you'll know that I'm actually terrible at time management. So I still feel actually pretty proud of myself. Our next meeting will be Thursday, February 11th at 5:30. And we hope to discuss in more depth this idea of like, what's our annual report and what's our kind of plan moving forward. So stay tuned for that information. And with that, I'd like to adjourn our meeting. Can I get a motion to do so?
I motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Great.
Lori, did we approve the prior meeting, the meetings from, minutes from the last meeting?
We did.
We did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how about a second for that?
Second.
Great. And you can vote by just pressing the red leave button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.